I'm going to use this little deer as an example. I found this image on the internet since many of us like to have a picture of the final product. Sometimes it's helpful to go ahead and just use somebody else's painting to guide us. So when you do this painting, you are going to want to make sure you keep in mind that when you are using somebody else's painting as inspiration for your own, you want to make sure that you, number one, give credit to that person, and number two, you want to make sure you don't ever sell something that you don't own the rights to. So in this case, I'm directly copying from somebody else's painting. So alright, so this is a good way to practice by looking at somebody else's, finished product. I learned a lot about painting from watching other people. I like to look at other people's paintings, and it just, it definitely helps me to understand as a teacher how to give you a little bit more knowledge and understanding and specific painting techniques because I've watched other people do it. So right now I'm just mixing up a little palette of different browns. I have some red browns, I have some dark browns, I'm going to have some yellow browns and some orange browns. So in the picture here you can see some light yellows, and here there's a little bit of orange browns, some dark browns in here. Just a tiny bit of red browns in here. So the main thing that you're going to be focusing on first is just getting the basic shape of the deer down. You'll notice it kind of fades along this front side and fades along this side as well. That is a really nice effect. You can, as the artist, decide if that's what you want to do or not. Just another technique. There's millions out there, millions of different ways that you can paint an object. So I'm making my yellow brown here, and then I'm going to have more of an orange brown. So the nice thing about watercolor painting is that you can really build up your colors. So I like to start really light in the very beginning. So I have my yellow brown, orange brown, dark brown, light brown, and then I'm just going to go in with a really light watered down brown just to get it started. So that means I'm putting a whole bunch of water mixed in there, because when I start putting some color or some watercolors on my paper, I want to make sure that I don't go too dark. So I'm just going to kind of draw with my paintbrush real lightly. So light you might have a hard time seeing it. Zoom in a little bit. So I'm just going to real lightly mark in where the little details are on this little deer. So his face takes on a shape similar to this. And I'm just going to use this as just a starting point. And when I do this initially, he's going to look like a dog. That's okay. We'll know it's a deer in the end because of all of the features. So right now, I'm just getting some of the, I'm drawing with my pen. I'm just, my paintbrush, I'm just tickling the page and trying to get the shape. And that's easier for some people than others. If you prefer to go in with a pencil, you can, although because this watercolor painting is so light, you might find that it's really hard to cover up the pencil. So you decide. So over on this side is going to be faded quite a bit in the image. Your painting is not going to have a complete deer in there, meaning I'm not going to have legs. I don't see a tail. So now I just have some basic information. I need to make his head larger than it is right now. Now, one thing you'll notice about watercolor painting is that anytime your paper is wet and you go to apply paint, all of the areas that you touch with your paintbrush that are wet, that paint will bleed into that area. So you want to keep that in mind. So that's also, that makes painting hard for some people, and that makes watercolor painting like really glorious for others. So keep this in mind, that your watercolor paints are supposed to bleed into other areas. You are supposed to learn how to make those areas stand out by letting that paint kind of do its thing. So that's why I chose this painting, because I wanted you to see some of the qualities. There's a lot of color blending in here. Okay, so right now I just wet this area right here, and there's a little bit of brown tip to it. So I'm just going to take my dark brown and I'm just going to touch that area, and look how it's spreading. And that is one of the glorious things about watercolor painting. So you want to learn how to control the paints as best you can, and that means that you're purposefully going in with colors and pigments and trying to make it bleed throughout the painting, because that's kind of what watercolor does. You don't always have to paint that way with watercolors, but see how I'm just applying some water, no pigment, and I'm going to let that paint kind of spread. And I don't want hard lines, so I'm going to go over the whole face and just let that paint kind of spread. So I'm making sure not to get water on any other part of the paper. And the reason I'm doing that is because I don't want that pigment or the watercolor paints to spread to any other area except where the paper is wet. So I just touched this little area here with a little brown, and I'm going to let it spread and do its thing. Now I can do a little bit over here and see if I like what I'm doing. I feel like I need more yellow, so I'm just going to make a little spot here, add some yellow in there. Oh, is it too much? It might be. See how it's spreading? Okay, then I can make a decision. If I don't like what I'm seeing, I can take a paper towel and I can wad it up and I can lift off that paint in the areas that I don't want it. See, that's called a lift. And this is just the beginning. We're just getting started, just getting a little paint on the paper, getting comfortable. Now I'm gonna move on to the body. So I'm gonna go ahead, this is called a wet on wet technique. I'm taking just regular water and I'm spreading it to the areas where I want my paint to bleed into. Now I'm gonna leave this area right here. I'm leaving that dry because I don't want, for right now, I want to leave that dry because I don't want my pigments or my watercolor paints to bleed into that area, because it's connected to the face, which I just worked on, so I'm not ready for that to blend into that area. I want to work on just this area for his body. And remember, there's really no legs or any details like that. Now, there are some little white spots. I could have painted around and left those areas dry. For right now, I'm just gonna get a little color in there just to get it started. Just a little bit. Just give me a little bit of color. And I can always let it dry. What if I made a mistake and, oh man, I really want those white spots in there? Okay, no problem. Let's go ahead and just put a little bit of that brown in there. And I'm just gonna touch the paper, tickle the page, if you will, with a little bit of pigment. Okay, now there really isn't a good way for me to describe this other than you will for certain not have a painting that looks exactly like somebody else's. Okay, you really just can't control the water in that way. When I say control the water or the paint, what I'm referring to is I want you to have a method to where that paint is going to go. So I'm controlling my paint in the water by keeping specific areas dry as opposed to painting all of it. So now I'm going to go ahead and let this dry a little bit, and then when I come back we will begin putting on just a little bit more pigment and details. And like I said, we're just, controlling the paper, so the paint in the water. And so if I let this dry, then I can go back in a little bit and start doing another method of keeping certain areas dry to give it the little dots. But right now I have a nice little base coat.